Welcome to the Crown Hill Journey. I have my glass of wine. It's Friday night. Sometimes it's hard to know which day it is, being in the house all the time, but we're keeping track through this book. And this is our third day of reading. And tonight we are going to read 2 chapters because they're shorter chapters, so we're putting them together. And we are in Book 2, Chapter 2 and 3. Just to do a quick review, Book 1 was about Mary Southwick and her husband Owen. 1 chapter, 1 book. It was the very first beginning of the book. In it, we learned that Mary had a very difficult marriage. Owen was abusive to her, and she worked really hard to try to do everything his way, but usually ended up failing through no fault of her own, but mostly through his temper. We learned that Mary loved her home. She found the solace and love in her life at her home as opposed to in her marriage, and that the house meant everything to her. We also learned that she ended up dying, being hung, or being found. She was found hung in a shed behind her house. Those are all true facts about Mary and Owen Southwick, who actually lived at Crown Hill. Then we moved on to the second book of Crown Hill, which is Edward Randall. He is a very prominent Buffalo attorney and businessman. He is married to Maria. They have 2 daughters. Crown Hill is their summer home. We meet them as Edward is leaving Buffalo, having taken care of his business so he can go to Crown Hill and spend the summer with his wife and daughters there. As he goes to leave, he gets a frantic call from his wife that a young girl from a neighboring house has come to visit, and while there, she has had an unusual experience where she had tremors and spoke to something that didn't appear and had a blue orb that came over her head. And the entire kitchen where Maria and the girls and this young girl named Rose was cold, and kind of kept the girls frozen, Maria and the girls frozen in place while this young girl spoke to something unknown. She then passes out, and Maria calls Edward to tell him what's happened. Edward, in addition to being a businessman, has also been involved in the world of spiritualism. A woman by the name of Emily French, who again, this was truth. A woman by the name of Emily French from Rochester, New York, was a direct voice medium. She was so good that people hired Edward Randall to prove her fraudulent. And he not only could he not do it, he gave back the money, quit the case, and became Emily's greatest disciple and promoted her. Together, the 2 of them became nationally renowned on the topic of spiritualism, traveling together and lecturing. Edward went so far as to build a seance room in their house. At the time, it was West Ferry in the city of Buffalo. So Maria is aware of these things, and she has told Edward, while the spiritualism and the seance house in the city is fine, she never wants it to interfere with Crown Hill. And that's where we are. Maria has called him and told him what's happened with this young girl, Rose, and we are now about to begin the journey into this history with Edward Randall and Crown Hill. Again, I'll be reading 2 chapters tonight. I'm going to do my best to do different voices with the characters, but the one character that you need to be most aware of is the house. At the end of every chapter, the house comes in and advances the story. When I finish a chapter, I'll pause slightly so you know that chapter is ended, and then the voice you will hear next will be of the house. So, let's begin the Crown Hill journey. I'm going to take a sip of wine, as always. With Mary's book, it was 1884. In this second book with Edward, we have begun in let me just look quickly, 22, just to give you a time frame. So this is Crown Hill, a novel of love, life, and the afterlife, Book 2, Edward, Chapter 2. Maria replaced the phone receiver onto the hook. Of all the times for the line to go dead, she agonized. Why now? A long wail interrupted Maria's thoughts. Mother, please, come quickly. Maria hurriedly pushed through the swinging kitchen door into the oversized dining room, then beyond the matching pocket doors into the parlor. After Rose had collapsed on the kitchen floor, Maria commanded her daughters to individually take hold of the young girl's limp and lifeless legs. With the caring mother supporting her head and upper body, they moved the pallid child onto the midnight blue mohair sofa in the parlor. Re-entering the room, Maria was shocked to see Rose sitting up, appearing completely awake and alert. "Could I have some chocolate, please, ma'am?" came the polite girl's request. Unsure of the unusual circumstance, Maria decided to send Virginia to fetch the candy jar tucked away on the top pantry shelf. Edward was passionate about chocolate and could not complete a day without savoring at least one milky morsel. Maria always kept a not particularly well-hidden stash in her pantry to satisfy her husband's late-night cravings. While waiting for her daughter to return, Maria decided that caution would be her best ally. "Rose, do you have any recall of what happened to you in the kitchen a few moments ago?" "Sort of, ma'am. It's what my mother and I call my awake dreams. I've had them all my life, but none in quite some time, before we came to live at the Spauldings." Maria considered the intense action she'd just witnessed in the kitchen to be a far cry from any dreams that she had ever known. Yet, as Virginia returned with a silver-wrapped chocolate and placed it in Rose's delicate hand, the normalcy of the moment enticed the weary woman to nearly imagine nothing unusual had really transpired. Nearly, but not quite. In Maria's eyes, Rose's self-described dream appeared much like the direct voice experiences she had, on occasion, witnessed in the presence of Emily French. It was a realization that made Maria none too happy. While her husband had become deeply involved with Emily and the proving of her direct voice medium abilities, Maria remained quite separate from their spiritual endeavors. There was something about the seances that frightened the devoted wife and mother. Accordingly, when Edward broached the subject of adding a séance room to their fashionable Buffalo home, Maria expressed her strong disapproval. However, her husband was determined. So, to save peace, Maria agreed to allow the spiritual retreat as long as it offered a separate entrance. It was her hope that the alternative entry would isolate all other worldly activities and participants from the Randalls' everyday lives. Maria further extracted a promise from Edward that spiritual activities of any kind would never occur at Crown Hill. Yet now, here she was, with her daughters, immersed in the very kind of spiritual circumstance that she had dreaded, with neither Edward nor Emily involved in any way. Regardless of the circumstance, Maria had no desire to become further immersed in whatever was going on in young Rose's life. She was also not going to allow what had just occurred to further invade Crown Hill or disturb her family's summer. Maria decided that the best course of action was to help Rose gather her strength and return the young woman to her home without delay. "Mother, whatever are we to do with her?" whispered Virginia as she drew close. Looking in her daughter's deeply brown, questioning eyes, Maria could see the true innocence of Virginia's heart. There was no doubt that her concern for Rose was genuine. Discreetly moving her caring child away from the parlor, Maria cradled her daughter's hands as she explained, "Once Rose feels strong enough, we are going to accompany her home." "But, Mother, are you going to ignore all those things that just happened in the kitchen? The way the girl trembled and cried, and the way she started talking as if someone was there. Aren't you going to tell her mother? Don't you think someone should make sure that she sees a doctor?" Maria knew that her reply would either pacify or further disturb her tender-hearted daughter. Accordingly, she chose her next words with care. "Virginia, there are people in this world whose minds cause them to act in unusual ways, just as Rose did here today." "Oh, Mother, do you mean like Father's friend, Mrs. French?" Again, Maria instinctively knew that her answer required thoughtful perfection. "Virginia, Mrs. French was a very unique woman, but I am not concerned with her right now. I am talking about Rose, who clearly has some sort of problem of which her mother is aware. We cannot change that, and it is not our place to interfere. So I am asking you to help me gather her up, and with your sister, we will make sure that she gets safely down the road to the Spaulding house." Virginia considered her mother's words for several moments before reluctantly agreeing. Truthfully, Maria was relieved that her daughter seemed more concerned with the welfare of the girl than the strange occurrence that they had just witnessed in the kitchen. Returning to the parlor, Maria found Rose and Marion snuggled together on the couch, absorbed in conspiratorial giggles. Though the scene appeared playful and quite natural, the thought of friendship between the two girls raised every hair on the back of Maria's neck. No doubt there was something unusual about this child, and Maria was sure the less her daughters knew of Margaret Rose Jennings, the better. "Well, young lady, I see that the chocolate must have had magical powers, as you seem fully recovered from your spell." Maria immediately regretted her choice of words. Ordinarily, she would not be bothered by innocent terms of enchantment. However, considering the events within her home over the last hour, she found suggestions of anything magical and out of the ordinary quite disturbing. Maria became even more concerned when she noticed outward signs that the odd girl seemed to be transgressing into yet another awake dream. Yet, as quickly as Rose's eyes widened and glazed, they refocused with her meek reply, "Oh, yes, thank you so much, ma'am, for this scrumptious chocolate." Drained of her energies, Maria announced the time was right to escort the young girl back to the Spauldings. She was determined that once they took that short walk down the road, Rose would be completely removed from her family's life. Awash in the warmth of the summer sun, the foursomes strolled along the winding country road to the Spauldings' driveway. From there, they advanced to the door of a small cabin behind the main entrance, the place Rose identified as a house for both she and her mother. With a respectful farewell, Rose left the Randall women, entering the cabin on her own. In ordinary circumstances, Maria would have insisted on speaking to Rose's mother about the morning's odd events. But truth be told, at this point, she was relieved to have the child gone from her presence. When the Randall women returned safely to Crown Hill, Virginia and Marion headed to the nearby vineyards for a game of hide-and-seek, while Maria moved to the porch into her favorite wicker sofa. Taking a deep breath, the weary woman tried to regain some sense of composure. Her attention was drawn to the horizon and the scenic beauty of Lake Erie in the far-off distance. The day was crystal clear, allowing her view to extend to the sandy edge of the Canadian shoreline and the landmark lighthouse at Point Avenue, Canada. The tranquil scene encouraged positive, peaceful thoughts within Maria's troubled mind. It had taken 10 years for her family's world to return to some sense of normalcy following Emily French's death. 10 years for their rightful place in Buffalo society to be re-established. Maria was not about to allow Rose and her condition to destroy all that they had recouped in that decade. As her overwrought mind and body began to release the morning's tensions, Maria assured herself that Rose's departure would allow all to once again be safe and well in her world. Settling comfortably into the comfort of the summer's day, the mindful woman suddenly became aware of a breeze blasting across the expansive Great Lake and through Eden's rural landscape. A cool edge sliced away at the warmth that had felt so comforting only moments before. Within that unsettling change came a series of unnerving shivers that traveled up and down Maria's spine and chilled the very fiber of her soul. As Mary's spirit burst from my being into the kitchen, I begged her to return to me, to retreat from approaching young Rose. At the same time, I understood completely why Mary was drawn to the child. Her pure and engaging innocence radiated through me from the moment she crossed my threshold. There was no doubt that this gentle girl had a saving grace of the kind that could help Mary's spirit. It was that glorious promise that ultimately overwhelmed Mary and compelled her to appear. Regrettably, in materializing, Mary unsettled both Maria and the girls. Their reactions made me fearful that, like so many before them, the Randalls might decide to abandon me. In the years since Edward and Maria first chose me as their summer retreat, in those initial moments when Edward Randall made his way through me room by room, I was infused by his caring manner and by the sensitivity with which he considered my being. Both Edward's initial actions and his aura inspired me to believe that he possessed extraordinary abilities. The fact that the Randalls lived most of each year in Buffalo, far removed from the tragedy of Mary's death and my ill repute, allowed them to be unaware of Mary's haunting presence. Further, whenever anyone in Eden engaged Edward or Maria with suggestions of my troubled reputation, they would quickly dismiss such caveats as idle gossip. It was Edward and Maria's fearless attitudes that ultimately caused me to beg Mary not to appear to any of the Randalls until I could fully ensure their comfort in my care. It was an entreaty that she first refused, but eventually and grudgingly agreed to uphold. Now, as Mary and I anxiously awaited Edward's arrival and his reaction to what had occurred, I agonized that my worst fears of losing the Randall family might quickly become real. Was there a way for me to ensure Edward would remain? That Rose would return? That their powers could connect and help Mary's spirit escape the pain of being trapped in this world? Most importantly, could I keep Mary safely guarded within my protective care until it all came to pass? Chapter 3. Though the Randalls were only in residence at Crown Hill during the summer months, they still required a year-round employee to maintain and care for their property. Being a bachelor with no ties to anyone but his mother, Arthur Smith was only too happy to add Crown Hill to his ongoing caretaking duties at the Spalding estate right next door. On this particular summer day, the all-purpose handyman's immediate Crown Hill chore was to sit at the Eden train station and await Edward Randall's arrival from Buffalo. As usual, Mrs. Randall and the girls had journeyed to Eden earlier in the week, departing Buffalo as soon as the school year ended. As Arthur understood it, Mr. Randall required additional time to put his business affairs in order, always arriving a week or so later. While most Eden residents still traveled by horse and buggy, Edward Randall was intrigued by the new driving machines produced by entrepreneurs such as Ransom Eli Olds and Henry Ford. So it was not surprising that he became one of the first in the rural community to own a Model T automobile. Part of Arthur's job was to learn how to drive and maintain the new vehicle, challenges that he enjoyed and easily handled. As the train steamed into the Eden station, Arthur gave the car one last wipe down in hopes that his extra effort might earn him a tip. However, when Edward Randall alighted from the train, his attention clearly was neither focused on the condition of his automobile nor on the man driving it. In fact, the usually gregarious barrister literally passed right by Arthur as he exited the train station. "Afternoon, Mr. Randall, sir." Hearing his name caused Edward to pause. "Oh, hello, Arthur. Sorry, I was lost in my thoughts." Arthur collected his employer's bags and secured them to the wooden luggage rack attached to the back of the touring car. Meanwhile, Edward climbed into the front seat of the vehicle. Unlike most that employed chauffeurs, Edward preferred to sit up front, where he could feel more directly involved with the driving process. Masterfully cranking the engine to a quick start, Arthur slid behind the steering wheel. Once underway, he turned to Edward and tried to engage him. "Hope your trip was pleasant, sir." Edward, still distracted, absently replied, "Yes, fine, thank you." The trip from the train station to Crown Hill was 2 miles in distance and took less than 6 minutes. The biggest challenge in the journey was the steep hill at the beginning of Sandrock Road. The sharp grade caused the Model T engine to groan and sputter, but as long as the gravity-forced fuel tank was full, there was no doubt the car would make the climb. As the two men rounded the curve in the road, passing the Spauldings' estate and approaching the hillside vista of the Randall summer home, Edward continued to exhibit a noticeable tension. Traditionally, the trip through Eden countryside was a cathartic break, bringing out the best in the hard-working attorney. Today, however, he was rattled, displeased, not at all himself. Arthur made a left turn in the entrance to Crown Hill and handily navigated the circular drive. As the car slowed at the home's terraced entryway, Edward alighted from the auto before it even came to a full stop, failing to acknowledge Arthur in any way. At that moment, Edward's thoughts were far from Arthur or any civilities. Passing under the rose-covered arbor of Crown Hill's entrance, all Edward could think about was the well-being of his wife and daughters and the strange events they had endured with the neighboring girl. "Maria? Girls, where is everyone?" Edward's call of concern echoed through the house without reply. He proceeded purposefully from the back porch, through the kitchen, and into the formal dining room. There, through an adjoining doorway, he caught sight of his wife outside on the wraparound porch. From where Edward stood, it appeared that Maria was resting on the white wicker sofa that she had so perfectly matched with complimentary chairs and tables. "Humph!" Edward fussed in exasperation. Quiet repose was the last thing he expected of his wife following the distressed phone call they had shared earlier. Edward gently clicked the brass-levered handle that opened the porch door. Stepping out onto the covered veranda, he could clearly see that his wife was not just simply resting. She was soundly asleep under the cover of a brightly striped Hudson's Bay wool blanket. Loudly clearing his throat, Edward attempted to make his presence known. Failing, he bent close to his wife and employed a more direct manner. "Maria, my dear, wake up." In a faraway fog, Maria heeded her husband's call and began to respond. Gradually, she awoke to the intensity of Edward's steel-gray eyes willing her to consciousness. "Oh, my," she responded with a startle. "Edward, when did you arrive?" "I just sat down for a minute. A chill came off the lake, and I wrapped myself in the blanket for warmth. I must have dozed off." Concerned and slightly confused, Edward launched into a lawyerly interrogation. "Maria, where are the girls? Is everything all right? What happened to the young neighbor child? What occurred after we spoke?" "Heavenly days, Edward, let me get my wits about me." Maria sat up and pulled several deep breaths of warm summer air into her lungs. As her mind connected with her memory, she began to explain. "Let's see. After I spoke with you, the young girl, oh yes, Rose, she recovered quite quickly from her fainting spell and actually seemed fine. So the girls and I walked her home, and that's all. Nothing else happened." Even from within her sleepy haze, Maria knew that she did not want to further disturb her husband by mentioning that the girl had almost slipped into another trance before leaving. No, she was not going to give Edward any further reason to become involved. At this point, Maria was dedicated to reestablishing her family's tranquil summer at Crown Hill, and she was quite sure that meant dismissing Rose and everything connected to her from their lives. "Father, Father, you're finally here!" Edward heard their voices well before the girls scrambled up the adjoining porch steps. Unlike their mother, Marion and Virginia desperately wanted to recount the details of their unusual morning to their father, and after quick embraces proceeded to describe each moment in detail. As Maria watched her children animatedly describe the frightening experience, she silently made a firm vow. Young Margaret Rose Jennings would never again be welcomed at Crown Hill. Further, Edward would never again be allowed to so much as raise the topic of spiritualism in their summer home. Case closed. No discussion, no lawyerly debates. And if for any reason Edward did not agree, Maria was fully prepared to gather the girls and return to Buffalo for the remainder of the summer, or forever, if need be. I was concerned about Maria. I had come to care for her deeply and did not want her or her daughters, who took every cue from their mother, to anguish over their lives within me. To that end, while Maria settled on the porch, I summoned peaceful powers to soothe her and allow her rest. Yet the respite from the day's events was far short of what Maria truly needed. From their conversations within my shelter, I was aware that Maria had remained detached from Edward's professional relationship with Emily French. I had witnessed their conversations, during which the devoted wife voiced to Edward her deep fear that the spirits who spoke during Emily's direct medium experiences might one day remain with them. Edward assured his wife that those to whom Emily gave voice were peaceful and kind spirits, presenting no harm to their family. As time passed without incident, Maria came to accept her husband's assertions as truth. However, when it came to summers within my shelter, Maria demanded and secured a promise from Edward that I would remain a respected retreat, free from seances and spiritual activity of any kind. Now, with the arrival of Rose and Mary's shocking appearance, in response, Maria was suddenly unsure of her family's safety within my walls. She was frightened, and I understood her fear. I also knew the traumatic hauntings that Mary could take. I was caught between my desire to comfort Maria and my promise to help Mary. Both women were strong and determined. Both women were in search of peace and comfort. Ultimately, both women wanted and needed Edward. The question was, if forced, which of these two women would Edward choose? So, that is the end of the third chapter of Edward. And one thing I want to be sure that I didn't clarify is that at the end of Mary's chapter, when she dies, the house promises her that it will help Mary. Mary was found dead. The town believes that her husband murdered her. The doctor in town says it was suicide. Of course, he's in collusion with Mary's husband, so we're not exactly sure what's happened to Mary, but whatever it is wounded, inextricably wounded her spirit, and she cannot pass from this world to the next. And in turning to the house for comfort, as she always did, even when alive or dead, the house has promised that it will help her find a way to pass. And so when the house refers to, she's worried about Maria, or I refer to the house as a she, sorry, that's my way of thinking about it. But when Crown Hill says that she's worried about Mary and wanting to comfort her, but at the same time she's promised this promise to, she's made the promise to Mary to help her try to pass, and at the same time she's trying to comfort Maria and keep her in the walls of the house. So, yeah. It's getting a little interesting, isn't it? As I said, as I read this story, I'm becoming involved with the characters again. I wrote this book in 2014, it came out, and I have not read it since. So when I practice each day, I get back in the world of the characters, and suddenly I'm not isolated anymore. I have a whole room full of people with me all day as I practice this reading during the daytime and then bring it to you at night. So I will be back tomorrow night at 7:30. I hope you are enjoying these readings. If you have questions, if you have suggestions, if you can't see or hear, if there's something that could be better or different, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment. And yeah. Oh, and the other thing, if you make it through the 30 days of this, in the beginning of May, there is a 4th book of Crown Hill that I wrote and was never published. It's like Mary's book. It's only 1 chapter. And so I think what I'll do is, when we get done with this book, I will read that 1 chapter that no one has ever seen but my editor. So that's something to look forward to. So I wish you a wonderful Friday night. We're not out partying and playing, but we are certainly blessed to be together. And I thank you for joining me. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. I'm thinking it might be a PJ night. Not for sure, but I don't know. But anyway, I'll see you tomorrow night with my wine, your coffee, your tea, your water, and Crown Hill. Enjoy the Crown Hill journey. Good night.